Prague Spring refers to a brief period of political liberalization and reform in Czechoslovakia during the year 1968, led by Alexander Dubček, the first secretary of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. It sought to implement democratic reforms within the framework of a socialist state and was part of a broader movement in Eastern Europe, where citizens and leaders were pushing for more freedoms within the rigid, Soviet-dominated system.
Background and causes. Czechoslovakia in the 1960s. Czechoslovakia was a satellite state of the Soviet Union, tightly controlled by the Communist Party. By the 1960s, there was growing dissatisfaction among the population due to economic stagnation, lack of freedoms, and repressive political conditions. Reforms of Alexander Dubček. In January 1968, Alexander Dubček, a Slovak reformer, became the leader of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. He aimed to create socialism with a human face, a form of socialism that allowed for greater personal freedoms, economic reforms, and political pluralism while maintaining a socialist system.
Reforms of the Prague Spring. Under Dubček's leadership, Czechoslovakia embarked on a series of reforms that were unprecedented in the Soviet-controlled Eastern Bloc. Freedom of speech and press. Censorship was relaxed, allowing for more open criticism of the government and greater freedom for the press. Newspapers and magazines began publishing criticisms of the Communist Party and advocating for more radical reforms. Political liberalization. While Czechoslovakia remained a one-party state, Dubček's government encouraged the creation of new, more democratic political structures. There was also talk of allowing multiple political parties and increasing citizen participation in government. Economic reforms. Dubček introduced market-oriented reforms aimed at decentralizing the economy and giving industries more autonomy. This was a move away from the strict central planning that characterized the Soviet-style economy. Greater autonomy for Slovakia. One of the goals of the reforms was to give Slovakia, one of the two constituent republics of Czechoslovakia, more autonomy within the federal system. Relaxation of travel restrictions. Citizens were granted more freedom to travel abroad, which was a significant departure from the highly controlled movement policies of most Eastern Bloc countries.
Soviet reaction and invasion. Soviet concerns. The Soviet Union, under Leonid Brezhnev, and other Warsaw Pact countries, such as East Germany, Poland, and Hungary, were deeply alarmed by the Prague Spring. They feared that Dubček's reforms would weaken communist control not only in Czechoslovakia, but across Eastern Europe, inspiring similar movements in other satellite states. Attempts at diplomacy. Throughout 1968, Brezhnev and other Soviet leaders tried to pressure Dubček to roll back his reforms. Despite warnings and negotiations, Dubček continued to push forward with his agenda, insisting that Czechoslovakia would remain a loyal socialist state. Warsaw Pact invasion. August 1968. On the night of August 20th to 21st, 1968, Soviet and Warsaw Pact forces from Poland, Hungary, East Germany, and Bulgaria invaded Czechoslovakia. Over 200,000 troops and 2,000 tanks were deployed to crush the reform movement. The invasion was swift and met with little armed resistance, though, many Czechoslovakians protested non-violently. End of the Prague Spring. Alexander Dubček and other leaders were arrested and taken to Moscow, where they were forced to agree to roll back the reforms. By 1969, the Prague Spring was effectively over, and a period of normalization began, with hardline communists reinstating strict Soviet-style control.
Aftermath and consequences. Restoration of Soviet control following the invasion. A more conservative and pro-Soviet government was installed in Czechoslovakia under Gustav Husek, who reversed the Dubček's reforms. Censorship was reinstated, political freedoms were curtailed, and the country returned to the tight grip of the Communist Party. Brezhnev Doctrine. The Soviet Union justified the invasion by articulating the Brezhnev Doctrine, which stated that the Soviet Union had the right to intervene in any socialist country that was seen as moving away from Soviet-style communism. This policy was used to maintain control over Eastern Europe and discourage any further reforms in the Warsaw Pact countries. Impact on Czechoslovakia. The Prague Spring left a lasting impact on the people of Czechoslovakia. While the reforms were reversed, the memory of the brief period of freedom and the brutal invasion remained vivid. This disillusionment contributed to the later rise of the Velvet Revolution in 1989, which peacefully overthrew the communist regime. International reaction. The invasion was widely condemned internationally, especially in the West. Even some communist parties in Western Europe, such as the Italian and French communist parties, criticized the Soviet action. However, no direct intervention occurred due to the Cold War dynamics. Simple reform movements. Although it was crushed, the Prague Spring became a symbol of the desire for reform and greater freedom within the Eastern Bloc. It also inspired future dissident movements in Czechoslovakia, such as the Charter 77 movement in the 1970s, which called for human rights and political reforms.
The legacy. Velvet Revolution, the spirit of the Prague. Spring lived on in Czechoslovakia, leading to the peaceful overthrow of the communist regime in the Velvet Revolution of 1989. The democratic movement that emerged at the end of the Cold War, built upon the ideas and aspirations of the Prague Spring.
Alexander Dubček's legacy. Although Dubček was sidelined after 1969 and removed from power, he remained a popular figure. He returned to the political stage in 1989 during the Velvet Revolution and was elected Speaker of the Czechoslovak Federal Assembly. He is remembered as a symbol of hope for political liberalization in the communist world.
Inspiration for other reform movements. The Prague Spring became a reference point for other reformers in the Eastern Bloc who sought to create a more humane and democratic form of socialism. Though the Brezhnev Doctrine prevented significant changes in Eastern Europe until the 1980s, the ideas of the Prague Spring influenced later movements, including the Perestroika and Glasnost reforms in the Soviet Union under Mikhail Gorbachev in the late 1980s.
Conclusion. The Prague Spring of 1968 was a bold attempt to reform communism from within and create a system that combined socialist ideals with greater personal and political freedoms. Although it was ultimately crushed by the Soviet invasion, the Prague Spring became a powerful symbol of resistance against totalitarianism and inspired future movements for democracy and human rights in Czechoslovakia and beyond. Its legacy continued to shape Czechoslovak politics until the eventual fall of communism in 1989. Thank you for watching the video, The Prague Spring, provided by History and Current Events. This is Sarah, Lily, Gina, Brian, and Tony have contributed so far as narrators. Thank you.